So last week, we spent a considerable amount of time on the Garden of Eden. And this week, I want us to pick up on the Tree of Knowledge. And I also want us to spend time revisiting the snake, although last week we spoke about the snake in context of ego and things like that, but I'd need to revisit some of those ideas. And this week, I want to introduce Lilith, because people always find her to be a particularly fascinating character. And I really want to get into what the importance of all this stuff is in relation to the lives, excuse me, the lives that we live today, because there are actually massive, massive, massive repercussions that have been felt throughout all of history because of the Garden of Eden story. So to recap where we're up to, we've got Adam and Eve being our divine masculine feminine entity being split into two. And they've been told by Hashem in the beginning of Genesis, in the beginning of Bereshit, I'll put you in the garden and you can eat from all the trees. And the Medrash has an interesting comment on this idea of all the trees, because in the Garden of Eden and in the beginning of the world, there was no such thing as a weed. Not only was there no such thing as a weed, but every plant bore fruit. Every plant bore fruit, or if it was a vegetable, if it was a vegetable, of course, it was edible as well. At this point, no one's eating no one's eating animals. And the reason why I get that mixed up with human beings is because to kill an animal after creation is the same as murder. So there's no eating animals. There's no eating human beings. So we've got Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, and Hashem says you can eat from all the trees except that one. That one is the Eitz Hadas Tovara. That one is the tree of knowledge of good and bad. That is its full name. And so we've got the snake, the Nachash. And we spoke last week about the Nachash beginning with the letter Nun, and the letter Nun being shaped like a snake. And so the letter Nun, which is shaped like a snake, is the first letter of the Hebrew word Nachash. All very interesting. We've got the snake, and the snake is some sort of walking, talking, communicative, non-human. That much we understand. And what we said last week was that the Nachash said to Chava, here, touch the tree, touch the fruit. You see, nothing happens. And that was the Nachash's trick, because Hashem never said, don't touch the tree. Hashem said, don't eat from the tree. So when the Nachash says, hey, touch the tree, nothing happens. You see, nothing's going to happen. He's eroded her defenses. And then he says, let's eat it. And Chava eats it and then gives it to Adam. And Adam says, what are you doing? You can't eat it. And she says, don't worry, nothing happened. So the Nachash, we spent a bit of time last week, and I'll just recap. The Nachash is negative. What is negativity, though? What is negativity? What is bad? So if a tree falls, is that bad? It's pretty innocent happenstance. So if a tree falls, it's not bad. If a tree falls on top of a person and kills them, is that bad? So without getting all philosophical, I'd hope you say, yeah, that's bad. So the impact and the outcome is what makes something bad. In of itself, take a gun. A gun is not bad. A bullet is not bad. A gun and a bullet held by a very wicked person is not bad. It becomes bad when it has been used in order to do something harmful. What is bad? Well, you might say the removing of life or taking advantage of another person. That's bad. That's pretty good. Bad is to go against the purpose of existence. The Nachash is not bad. The Nachash is a species that's walking and talking. The Nachash only becomes a problem when Chava eats the fruit. Hashem creates a neutral species that has a tendency to want to do what it wants, And it tells Chava, let's eat from the tree. At that point, it's engaging in the possibility of doing something bad, but it isn't until Chava eats that something bad has taken place. And then the whole conversation they've had till then retrospectively becomes bad as well. And the source of that conversation, i.e. the snake, retrospectively becomes bad. So Hashem didn't create a bad thing in the snake, but Hashem created within the snake the capacity to want to do bad. And the way it does that, the way Hashem does it is not by creating bad, but by creating something that has a desire to fulfill its own will. And Chava and Adam have the capacity for that, but they are not inclined to that, which is why Chava says, no, I don't want any part of this. Because Adam and Chava have the capacity to be aware of something bad when they see it. But when they see something bad, they're able to reject it. They're able to say, no, I don't want in on this, because they can identify it and then they can walk away from it. That's the capacity they've got. The snake doesn't have that. The snake is just following its desire. The snake is basically the most intelligent of all animals. Animals want to do what they want to do. They want to eat what's good for them. They want to eat what makes them feel good, and they don't eat when they don't want to. They cohabit when they want to, and they don't cohabit when they don't want to. It's all about what you want and what you need, and that's what you do. So the snake is just a very sophisticated version of that. Adam and Chava, on the other hand, are born with free choice. They have the choice as to whether or not they are going to do what they desire, or whether they'll hold back. So when the Nachash approaches Adam and Chava, this is quite a significant thing, because there is a choice as to whether or not they're going to eat the fruit. They can choose to say to the snake, we don't want to. But what's also interesting is that the desire to eat the fruit doesn't come from within. Adam and Chava don't. They look at the tree, they go, okay, don't eat from that tree. It's only when the snake puts it to them and convinces them that there is something to even think about, that they can develop their own desire to do something wrong, which means that Adam and Chava were created with a negative conscience, the ability to do something bad, but that something did not exist within themselves. It's not a part of, it's not a part of their thinking. It's an external force called the Nachash. In this way, they're very, very, Adam and Chava are very, very different to you and I. You and I, we have within us, we have a tendency, we have desire to do things that are selfish or to do things that are bad. And so when we wrestle with desire, it's an internal wrestle. When Adam and Chava at this point of the story are wrestling with desire, it's an external force. And that's why last week I spoke about briefly that there is as is described in Medrash and in spiritual Kabbalistic writings, that the snake, the Nachash, has some sort of sexual union with Chava. And by experiencing that sexual experience, Chava is able to take into herself a selfish attitude. Then she eats from the tree of knowledge of good and bad, and that means she has ingested the fruit of the knowledge of good and bad. She has ingested the knowledge of good and bad. What is this knowledge of good and bad? So first I have to start with, what is knowledge? So I'm going to ask you, what is knowledge? 2 + 2 = 4. You all said it, or you all thought it. You know that. You didn't have to think about it. You just know 2 + 2 = 4. That's it. 2 + 2 = 4. What color is the sky at night? Black. You know that. You don't have to think about it. You don't discover it. At most, you might have to recall it, but you're recalling something that's already within you. Knowledge is something that is a part of you. It's not something that you need to acquire. You've finished the acquisition process. You've finished the thinking process. You've finished the developmental process. It's now a part of you. 2 + 2 = 4. At night, the sky is dark. In winter, it is cold. You know these things. Inherently, you know these things. They've become a part of you. So when we say da'as, eitz hadas tovara, the tree of knowledge of good and bad, knowledge means that something is intimate with you. As I spoke last week in a slightly different context, in the book of Genesis especially, we find that Yediah, Adam Yodas Chava, Avram Yodas Sarah, that these people know each other is not an intellectual knowing of each other. It's a romantic knowing of each other. It's an intimate knowing of each other. It's an intimate being with each other. As knowledge is one with you, so when one encounters in sexual intimacy, there is the experience of knowing, of being one with the other and being completely united. So when you eat the fruit of the tree of good and bad, then you become intimately involved in good and bad, which means that all knowledge up until this point that exists within Adam and Chava is the knowledge of good. They know Hashem. They know the creations. When Adam sees the animals, when he sees a lion, he says, "Oh, that's an Aryeh. It's an Aleph Resh Yud Hey." He knows the spiritual mechanics of a lion and is able to identify that it's made up of 4 elements: the element of Aleph, the element of Resh, the element of Yud, the element of Hey, and that spells the Hebrew word Aryeh, which means lion. He knows it. He knows it. It's just Hashem created him with that knowing. What Hashem did not create them with an internal knowing was the knowledge of bad. What is bad? Bad is to do that which Hashem doesn't want you to do. Hashem doesn't want that there is murder. Hashem doesn't want that they eat from the tree of knowledge. And when they are created, they have no desire, no interest in eating from the tree of knowledge. That doesn't mean there isn't a force that wants them to, but that force is not inside them. It is an external force, which is the Nachash. But Hashem has created Adam and Chava with the capacity of free choice, which means that if bad presents itself, they could choose it. They can choose it. So for the first few hours of their existence, Hashem says, I do not want you to have the knowledge of bad. Right now, you've been endowed with the knowledge of good, but I do not want you to have the knowledge of good and bad for whatever reason. And it's not important what whatever reason is, because what is important is what happens when they eat from the tree of knowledge of good and bad. To understand that, I need to use a metaphor of eating. When you eat fruit and veggies, most fruit and veggies that are grown on farms nowadays have pesticides, and they have all sorts of different chemicals, because if they didn't, much of the produce that is grown on industrial level farms would be attacked by insects and bugs or bacteria, what have you, and it wouldn't be fit for consumption. And as a result, there wouldn't be enough food for the masses. Or you could take a cynical point of view, which is too much would not be sold, and therefore there's not enough money. Whatever it is, the purpose of these different chemicals is to preserve and protect the fruit or veggies. But when you eat those fruit and veggies, even if you wash them, there are so many different powerful chemicals. And not only are the chemicals sprayed onto the plants, but they're in the soil as well, that they're in the fruit and veggies. So when you eat these fruit and veggies, you ingest not only the fiber and the vitamins and the nutrients that exist in the fruit and veggies, but you also ingest the chemicals that are in those vegetables. So take kale. Kale is a very healthy vegetable. It's a very dark green leafy vegetable. It's filled with goodness. But if kale is grown in a setting which also has chemicals, then not only are you getting all the goodness, but you're also getting the chemicals. You say, okay, the chemicals aren't that bad. They don't kill us, whatever. You can do your own research into that. But nevertheless, we don't want these chemicals in our body, but they're there. And if there's a buildup of these chemicals, that can have very disastrous effects on the body. So when we eat fruit and veggies from a regular farm, not only are we getting the nutrients of the fruit and veggies, but we're also getting the chemicals that have been added to the fruit and veggies. When Adam and Chava ate the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and bad, they ingested both good and bad. Now what is unique about this is that until this point, everything besides that tree was good or bad. If in retrospect, the nochash is bad, everything else is good. So as long as you're eating good, you've got good. Now they become intimate with bad. To help you understand what I am on about, I'm going to continue the story. And if you open up a Bereshis, if you open up a Genesis, do you want me to post the link? Do you want me to show you something? Yeah, you want me to? Yeah, okay. I'll get my Genesis link again. We love our Genesis link. Give me one sec. You're going to like this. Okay, I'm posting it in the comments. And I'm going to share my screen so you can see what I'm about to go on about. All right, here's Bereshis. I'm scrolling all the way down. Here we've got the planting of Gan Eden. Remember, we went all into that last week. The garden in Eden, all that, right? Okay. So as for the tree of the knowledge of good and bad, we're now in Perek Beis, chapter 2, verse 17. You can't eat from it. Okay. It's not good for man to be alone. We've got the creation of Eve, blah, blah, blah. Fantastic. Okay. We've got the creation of Eve. We went through that already 2 weeks ago. And here we go. Here we go. Okay. So, we've got, this is an important pasuk here, 21. And Hashem made garments of skin for Adam and Chava and clothed them. They are clothed in skin. This garment of skin means that they are walking around naked. They're walking around naked in the Garden of Eden, full on nude. And Hashem says, now that man has become like us, is going to live forever. It's going to be fantastic. This is the physical version of our spiritual reality, says Hashem. Good. Then we've got chapter 4. You see that? He knew his wife Eve, all that. That's cool. So we've got them being driven out. And what I want to show you. I can't find it now because we're already on to Cain and Abel. I'm not going to get into it now because it's going to take too much time. I realize I have to open Rashi as well, and I'm not going to do that now. Let me stop the share and come back to you guys. What do you know? What is the famous thing that happens after they eat from the tree of knowledge? The famous thing is that they covered themselves up. They realized they were naked. The Torah tells us. I just can't jump back and forth right now. We're just going to run out of too much time because I know me. I get really excited by the texts, and yeah, it's just not cool. We're going to run out of time, and then we're going to have 5 more weeks of this. So just roll with me. You can read the text in the link that I put. So they cover themselves up. Why do they cover themselves up? What's wrong with walking around naked? You've been happy till now. Why is the first thing after eating from the tree of knowledge? Why is the first response to cover themselves up? And the reason is because up until this point, Adam and Chava walking around naked, and as is described in the Mefarshim, in the commentaries, their whole skin radiates their soul. And if you want to know what that means, or what that would it feel like? Look at someone in the face and then look at their hand. When you look at someone's hand, you don't have any revelation as to who they are. But when you look into someone's face, you don't see the individual things. When you look at someone's hand, you see their hand, you see their fingers, you'll see their veins. You notice each detail, right? When you look at someone in the face, you don't go, oh, they're their eyes, their nose, their mouth. The first thing you look at is the totality. Our faces reveal who we are. Our faces are a revelation of neshama. That's why in Jewish law, we don't cover the face. We are not allowed to cover the face, because to cover our face is to cover the revelation of our soul. There's only one time that we cover faces while we're alive. That's at a chuppah. At a chuppah, a bride covers her face. But other than that, veils are not a thing in Judaism. So much so in the laws of Shabbos, this is completely like sidetracked. See, I haven't even got a text in front of me. I'm getting sidetracked. In the laws of Shabbos, it says that if a house is burning down, you can go inside and you can put on a whole lot of layers of clothes to be able to take them out of the house on Shabbos, because we're not allowed to carry in a public domain, but you can put on a certain number of clothes. It's not considered carrying, it's considered putting on clothes. One of the items that you're not allowed to put on in order to carry them outside during the fire on a Shabbos is a veil. You're not allowed to put on a veil, because veils are not a part of our wardrobe. You might have a veil for whatever reason, but we don't wear a veil as a religious symbol or as a garment that Judaism wants us to, because we don't want to cover our face. When a person dies, and sadly I've been involved today at 2 funerals. By the way, the reason why I'm in this room and not the null room, excuse me, that might be why I'm yawning, is because behind me is a painting that was painted live when we had a special Torah dedication made by the Gordon family. And today we did a funeral for their son, which was a very, very sad, tragic affair. So I wanted to do the shir in here and just spiritually have them involved in the shir by incorporating their artwork, which is, as you can see, it's Har Sinai, and it's quite a dramatic piece of art. And I want to incorporate it into our shir tonight in his honor, in Greg's honor. Anyway, so when someone dies, we cover their face. It's a very, very hard thing. I don't go and tell families, hey, you've got to cover the face, but you're meant to, because the face is now naked. It's no longer radiating the soul, because the soul has left the body. You look at a dead body, and it's not just it's dead, it's lifeless. You look at their face, and their face is not them anymore. There's something gone. The soul is no longer radiating, and therefore the face becomes like the rest of the body, becomes erva, it's naked. So we cover it up out of respect. But you're not allowed to cover up a face of a living person, because it's not erva, it's not naked, it's revelation. When Adam and Chava were walking through the Garden of Eden naked, it was a full body revelation. When you looked at the heel of Adam, or you looked at the heel of Eve before they ate from the tree, it was a more profound experience than looking you and I in the face. It was more profound. It was a straight up gilui. It was a straight up revelation of the soul. Their soul permeated and saturated every part of their body. There was nothing, because their souls and their body were completely transparent to one another. When they ate from the tree of knowledge and they ingested ra, they ingested bad, they ingested negativity, it became physically a part of them, and it became spiritually a part of them. They took the snake's element and brought it into themselves. And therefore the soul was concealed somewhat, and their body was no longer a revelation of their spiritual energy and source, their neshama, but rather a concealment. And therefore they look at each other, and not only is their physical body now concealing their soul, but their whole self has been changed because they've now ingested Ra. It's the chemicals of Ra, the energy of Ra is now, of bad, is now a part of them. It's part of their blood, it's a part of their heart, it's a part of their brain, it's a part of their mind, it's a part of their emotion, it's a part of their psyche. And for the first time, Adam looks at Chava and she's naked and he doesn't see soul. Not only does he not see any soul, but he's also thinking Ra in a bad way, bad being ego to the detriment of others. My world, not God's world. My joy, not God's joy. My reality, not the higher reality. Looks at Chava and he sees breasts. And he sees a naked woman. And he doesn't see soul. He experiences pleasure. The pleasure of looking. The pleasure of wanting. What does Chava see when she sees Adam? Nakedness. Pleasure. Selfish, hedonistic pleasure. And then they experience shame. How could we look at each other and have such negative thoughts? What are the negative thoughts? The negative thoughts is not attraction to one another. The negative thoughts is the selfish desire of the other. To see the other as a tool, the other as a source of joy, a source of pleasure for self, nothing to do with me, with them. And as a result of that shame, they cover up the very things that they realize they're attracted to. They cover up their private parts of their body. And that's because they've eaten from the tree of knowledge of good and bad. Now they have the knowledge to be able to see the world as good or bad or a mixture. Now I'm going to say one more thing and then I'm going to stop for questions. Not only do they eat from the tree of knowledge of good and bad and it changes their psyche, but it changes their very DNA, their very physical self. And now anything they produce is a composite and a combination of good and bad. Up until now, anything that they produced was just good, like they were. Now that they have brought those toxins, so to speak, into who they are, it alters who they are so that even their seed, even their egg, produces a mixture of good and bad. All of humanity has not only the choice to do good or bad, but has the internal tendencies to want to do good and want to do bad. Not because there's a nachash outside hacking us to do something, but because we have internalized the nachash element. And that's become a part of us, and we breathe that into our children. Beck, yes, that's why not Cain is bad, but that's why everyone after Adam and Chava are able to have negative capacity and negative components. And when we get to the story of Cain and Abel and the murder that takes place, that is the product of the tree of knowledge of good and bad. That's why they're chucked out of the Garden of Eden. And that's why Hashem accuses them of introducing death into the world. For a moment ago, I read you the pasuk and it says they're going to live forever. Now they've got a death date. Now they've got a death date. Because now that you've eaten from the tree and you've gone against my will and you've done something bad, you've internalized bad, you can no longer live forever because only good lives forever. If you have elements of bad within you, then you can't live forever. Ergo, you can't live forever. Not only that, but you're going to become responsible for doing bad things. And with that, we have not only Adam and Chava changing, but the whole world changes. They introduce the integration of good and bad into the whole world. Until this point, it had been isolated except for that tree. Except for that tree, it had all been isolated. And with that comes weeds, I should say. With that comes weeds, thorns, and trees that no longer bear fruit. I'm going to pause. Any questions on what we've discussed so far? You can unmute yourself if you want.
Menachem, this
Yes.
was all set up. I mean, this was absolutely Hashem's intention.
Oh, yes. Oh yes, 100%. Which is why I said let's not get too fixated on why did Hashem create the world the way it was, because it's not important what the way it was. It's more important what happens next. It's very, very. It's a brilliant design, because Hashem says it wasn't me. I created you good. I created you with free choice. I created the Nachash, the snake. The snake can push you to do bad things, but it itself doesn't do bad things. It is only you have to choose it. Hashem has set up a perfect storm. What we need to understand is why. Why the perfect storm? Why can Adam and Chava eat from the tree of knowledge of good and bad in a few hours' time on Friday night? I'm going to get to that. Okay. Any other questions?
Is this, when a child is born, is there, what I found was that there's good. Up to a certain age, nakedness didn't matter. They would be very happy in hot weather to walk around naked, boy or girl. Take him to the toilet, no problem, right? Until a certain age, no, I want my privacy. And also they were good. Their initial reaction to everything is good. They didn't think there was no evil. So is that really Adam and Eve before eating from the tree of good and evil?
Yeah.
Or is it that they were young enough, Adam and Eve, like our children and grandchildren, that they were going to develop these things anyway, whether there's a tree or not? So which way is it?
So they're definitely created as mature age, naive children, as you've said. And they would not have developed into any sense of ego had they not eaten from the tree. The tree introduces them to corruption, which is not the same as if you dumped a child on a desert island. Would they learn to do bad? The answer is yes, because we all have within us the capacity already to do bad. We already have the capacity of ego. We already have the capacity of us ahead of others, us to the detriment of others. That is actually all inherent within us. Unlike Adam and Eve, if you dump them on a desert island, which Hashem did, they never would have gone that way had there not been a Nachash and a tree. Never. If there was no tree and a Nachash, they still wouldn't have learned from the Nachash. They would have rejected it. It's only the integration. Now, you're all waiting for, but why do it? Why do it? So I'm going to have to answer that instead of launching into the whole Lilith narrative and everything else. And it's probably good, because the whole Lilith stuff's a bit of a sideshow. It really is a sideshow. It's fun. Everyone enjoys that sort of weird occult stuff, but we need to understand the purpose. Why did Hashem set up a world that is doomed to fail? What's the purpose of all that? So first, let me go through what would have happened if they would have eaten from the tree of knowledge of good and bad a few hours later on Friday night. Because if it would have come to Shabbos and they would have eaten from it, not only if they would have been told to eat from it then. And the reason is because Shabbos is so profound. As we read in the Kiddush, Vayonach bayom hashvi, Hashem rested on the seventh day. There's a whole energy change to the world, to the point that had they eaten from the tree of knowledge of good and bad on Shabbos, they would have elevated the bad into good, and that would have been it. That would have been the end of the whole purpose of existence. That bad would have been transformed into good. The snake would have been a force of good. Shabbos would have cleansed and changed the energy of the tree. As I spoke about, the whole original source of negativity is, remember we went through Hishtalshlus 2 or 3 weeks ago about the Sfirot exploding and all that. Remember, I went through all that, and the larger shards and the smaller shards. Had it come to Shabbos, those shards would have come back together in a state of menucha, in a state of calm, in a state of comfort, in a state of wholeness, and all bad would have been re-engaged with its source, and it would have discovered its own good, and that would have been the end. It would have been perfect. There's just one problem with that happily ever after story. You all know the story of Goldilocks and three. No, that's not a happily ever after story. Do you know the story of Little Red Riding Hood? Yeah. I'm going to quickly look at all the people who are on. I want you to wave if you know the story of Little Red Riding Hood. Okay, good. There are people who their cameras aren't on, but based on everyone who's waving, I'm going to safely assume that everyone knows the story of Little Red Riding Hood. See, two ways of knowing the story of Little Red Riding Hood. Here is the version you all know. She's walking through the forest and the wolf stops her. Where are you going, little girl? I'm going to visit my grandmother. He goes, and then there's different nuschos, different opinions as to what happens, whether he puts her in the cupboard or whatever. But whatever it is, the wolf is in the bed. And my grandma, what big eyes you have, what big ears you have, all the better to eat you with. And he jumps out, and Little Red Riding Hood is screaming, she's about to be eaten by the big bad wolf. And the hunter comes in and kills the wolf. And Little Red Riding Hood pulls her grandmother out of the cupboard, and they live happily ever after. That's the classic version that you know. That is the story of Adam and Eve as you know it. Now let me tell you the other version. Once upon a time, there was a little girl. Her name was Little Red Riding Hood. And she was walking through the forest. And a wolf stopped and said, "Where are you going, little girl?" And she said, "I'm going to my grandmother." And the wolf, who has the capacity to eat people, says, "Oh, that's nice." Anyway, she went and she visited her grandmother, and they ate, and she went home, and they lived happily ever after. That was the original Little Red Riding Hood. The fact that the wolf broke into the house changes the whole thing. The difference between the two stories is, in the second version, where Little Red Riding Hood goes to her grandma and they eat apple pie, and then she goes home and they live happily ever after, the wolf has not done anything bad, correct? Correct. But does the wolf have capacity to do bad? Yes. But when it doesn't end up doing bad and we say happily ever after, it didn't do any bad. And therefore the wolf is good because it hasn't done any bad. And so its potential to be bad comes to an end because happily ever after, the wolf is now good because it's the end of the story and there's nothing more to tell. That's the story of Bereshis had they not eaten from the tree of knowledge. But the problem with that is that we haven't truly rehabilitated the wolf. We've prevented the wolf from doing anything bad. When we say the words happily ever after, the wolf no longer can do bad because it's the end of the story. Wolves can't jump into the next story. It's the end of the story. But now, in the story of Little Red Riding Hood, as we know it, where it breaks into the grandma's house, there's a whole negative. It's a crazy story. A grandmother locked in a cupboard. It's a terrible story. It's traumatic. We've got a wolf in grandmother's clothes. This is crazy stuff. We've got a hunter with an axe who's going to kill the wolf. It's crazy. But at the end of the story, there is no bad. The wolf is gone. The bad action is now something that makes Little Red Riding Hood appreciate her grandmother even more. I thought you were dead, and now you're alive. I love you. I really love you. Not because I love you because you're my grandmother, because I thought I'd lost you, and now I've got you. I love you. And the hunter is now a hero, not just a wood chopper. And the evil wolf is no longer doesn't even exist. So although it's a far more traumatic, terrible story, the outcome is much more profound than the Little Red Riding Hood. It's so much more profound than Little Red Riding Hood. It meets the wolf, see you later, and goes and has apple pie and goes home and lives happily ever after. Why does Hashem need Adam and Chava to eat from the tree? Is because we need to get involved in the bad. Hashem needs the world to discover its true bad, because bad is a part of Hashem. Remember, Hashem is the infinite. Everything is Hashem. And in order for there to be shlemos, in order for there to be wholeness and true reconciliation within the universe, there has to be bad. There has to be the overcoming of bad and the true elevation of bad into good. And that is what Adam and Chava set on course. But you could never say as a storyteller, by the way, I really wouldn't mind seeing a grandmother getting locked up in a cupboard. No, you can't say that. God never would say such a thing. But now that it's happened, it's a bloody good story. So in the higher intention, Hashem wants that everything is elevated to good. And therefore, in the want of ultimately everything, there are flaws that are built in, not flaws. There are not corruptions. There are corruptions in the DNA of creation that lead to the potential for the manifestation of bad, for there to be the overcoming of bad and the ultimate existence of good. I've really trivialized it, but I think we've got an intelligent enough crowd to understand what we're angling at, albeit in a very, very condensed, simplistic way. And that is why Hashem sets up the stage for Adam and Chava to eat from the tree. And that's why they get chucked out and not the world gets turned over and turns to nothing. Hashem doesn't go, oh, well, stuff that will start again. It's not Groundhog Day. Because ultimately, this is still a part of the greater purpose. That even when they do something wrong, it's going to be woven into something great, something good in the end. Any questions?
So I was going to ask you, but I think it looks like you've answered it. I was going to ask you, how is it that Hashem would say, now the Adam has become like us after the first sin? So we're talking about the reunification with like the broken shards of Tohu in order to create to achieve tikkun.
Yeah, correct. Tikkun, which means order, is only profound. It's like doing a puzzle. You know, over the last couple of years, I think a lot of people have been doing puzzles. We've had a lot of puzzles done in our house. When you can buy puzzles, sometimes they come already done. And then you shake it off the board into pieces and then you do it. Other puzzles come in a box with them all jumbled up already. So the world was a perfect puzzle, as in potential. Hashem shakes the puzzle pieces onto the table. And then we do it. What if you buy the puzzle and it comes all nicely set up and then you frame it? You go, oh, look, the puzzle, it's all done. It's not, there's no kunz. You bought a puzzle that was already done. You can't frame it. Tikkun, but it's in a state of tikkun. It's in a state of order and repair. Tikkun is only profound after the tohu. Only after the chaos of all the puzzle pieces does a finished puzzle, which looks exactly the same as it did at the very beginning, actually is a whole other thing. When you hang up a puzzle that is finished on the wall, you've done it. It's a 5,000 piece puzzle and you did it and it's hanging up on the wall and someone walks in and goes, oh, it's a finished puzzle. Daron, did you do that? And you say, yeah. They look at it and it's a whole other thing to, if you had a puzzle on the thing and they go, did you do that? You say, no, I just bought it like that. But it looks exactly the same. What's the difference? There's a whole difference. So what Hashem is wanting is a finished puzzle that has been shaken up after it was whole. So there's tikkun, toyo, and tikkun.
The curious part is that until they ate the fruit, that there was actually that separation, that there was like a missing piece of the puzzle. They were separated from the puzzle.
Yeah, it's actually yeah, I like what you've done there. So it's like buying a 100-piece puzzle, and it comes with 99 pieces all in place. There's just one piece that's fallen out. So you get it and you put the one piece in. You did the puzzle. That's what would have happened. That was the original plan. Shabbos would have come in, they would have put the last piece in, and it's whole. Instead, the one piece was not in, and then they ate from the tree and all the other puzzle pieces fell out. So it was actually almost in a state of tikkun. And all they had to do was wait and it would have been finished. But yes, they would have done it, but their doing would not have had the accomplishment of a whole puzzle. And again, we're trivializing, so don't get lost in the metaphor, but allow the metaphor to help you understand the incredible initial stage.
Can I get a little more trivial and mention, thanks, that Hashem already knew the wolf was not going to eat grandma.
Why are you doing this to me? Go on.
I want to hear it from you.
Go on.
And therefore, there is a happy ending.
Because Hashem knows it already.
Sure.
Okay.
It's a little bit of a horror story.
Yeah, it's a great question. And that brings us back to week number 1, where we discussed the many names of Hashem. We said there are many names of Hashem. There's Adonai, there's Kel, there's Havaya, there's Elikim. What's with all the names? I'm going to say something that's pretty blasphemous, but it's the only way for us to have this discussion. So, of course, what I'm saying is anthropomorphic, so to speak. There are many layers to reality, and each layer is a different layer of Hashem's consciousness. There is Hashem's consciousness where past, present, and future is all one. And then there is Hashem's consciousness in the past, Hashem's consciousness in the present, and Hashem's consciousness in the future. On the level of where it's all one, of course, past, present, future is all one. It's all done already. It never had to happen, and it's happened and it's done already. On the lower levels, where you have a very linear, staged set of things that make up reality, it has not happened yet. So there is an aspect of Hashem that it is all perfect, and there is an aspect of Hashem that it is imperfect, and we are living in that aspect while rooted in the higher aspect.
Yes, it's time and space, and it's infinity all at the same
Correct.
time. Yeah.
Very good.
So
Very good. And then we can meditate on that for an hour, and then you can say the Shema. Yeah, Doron, you were going to ask.
So back to the puzzle analogy, we see it as a puzzle, but from Hashem's perspective, it's a holograph, where every piece is actually the complete image.
Oh, I like that. It is a holograph, of which then all the holographs coming together make a more 5D holograph. Yeah. I think we're just going to have to press pause on this, or else we're all going to trip out and we're going to lose track of everything. But we can hold on to this now, right? That this allows, so we've covered the snake, we've covered the Garden of Eden, we've covered the eating of the tree of knowledge of good and bad, we've covered the nakedness, we've covered the implications this has for the future going forward, and we still got to cover that a little more next week. Now we can introduce Lilith. Who is Lilith? Lilith is a feminine energy. So on different days of creation, Hashem created angels. Angels are how do I put this to you? Okay. Remember we spoke a few weeks ago, we spoke about angels, and we spoke about the different dimensions of reality. Atzilus, Bria, Yetzirah, Asiya. The shining. Remember, we had the sun metaphor, the light metaphor, the shining. And then we had Bria, which is creation, existence, Yetzirah, which is formation, and Asiya, which is the physical world. Angels exist in one dimension higher than physicality. The angel Michael, the angel Raphael, the angel this, the angel that, as in they are very specific forces with names. On a level higher than that, in the realm of Bria, there are no angels. There is the origin of the angel, the concept of chesed, the concept of gvura. When chesed, the concept, manifests into a force, not into a physical thing, into a force, it might become healing. When gvura manifests, it might become war and strength. So you have war, which is the origin of which originates in gvura, which originates in oir, which originates in light. So angels are a latter creation, a latter entity. They are not things that exist unto themselves. Angels are like trees. Trees don't exist unto themselves. They've got a particular purpose, and they've got a particular name, and they've got a particular way of being. Just we call them angels. We give it. Christianity's given them a lot more credit than they're worth. They're forces, and there are forces that are humble. They like light. Light is humble. In the metaphors that I give you. Light, when you meet a wave of light or a particle of light, you say, hello, light, what's your name? And it says, My name is light wave. I'm a wave that comes from the light. I'm not light. I'm just wave. You want light, go to my origin. It knows that it doesn't exist without the origin. And then you have light, a different form of light, which is light where you go, hello, light, what's your name? It's my name. My name is radioactive. Get out of my way. But the truth is, radioactive is also just an emission from a source of light. So when light is humble, it is bright, but it's all about its origin, and it's humbled to its origin. When light has ego, it doesn't matter what its origin is, it's about what it is. Not a lie, but its orientation is self, as opposed to source. And good angels, if you could say such a thing, are angels that are forces that are focused on their origin. Bad angels are forces that focus on their existence. Not to deny where they come from, but that's not the focus. This is the creation of ego and the creation of humility. This is, again, this goes back to the Shviras HaKelim. This goes back to the forces that wanted to absorb the energy of Hashem to the exclusion of others, as opposed to absorb and share. Remember, we spoke all about that with the hot air balloon metaphor, etc. a few weeks ago. So Lilith is some sort of force that manifests in some sort of physical form. We see that there's manifestation as it goes from Tzilus to Bria to Yetzirah to Asiya. You know, the angel Raphael is a manifestation of a concept, and the angel Raphael can manifest into healing in this world, medicine, doctors, whatever, medical science, what have you. Lilith is a manifestation that is referenced very loosely. If you look in the Safari link that I've put up, it references the other one. Chava is the other one. What other one? Indicating that Adam has had a relationship with someone else. If Chava is the other one, there must be another one. The Torah does not tell us anything more. For that, you have to go into the Mefarshim, you have to go into the commentaries. And when we look in Kabbalah and we find out about Lilith, Lilith is some sort of force. Lilith may not be a real physical entity, by the way. People love Lilith to be real because we love a good ghost story, but Lilith, I don't know what Lilith is. I can tell you, yes, Lilith is a feminine character that Adam is intimate with, that Adam's physically intimate with, that Adam has all these children with. I can tell you all that. There are makarios for that. There are sources for that. But it's just popularist if I say that. It's makes Torah fun instead of what it is, which is a complex revelation. Lilith, as is explored in Kabbalah, is a sexual energy within Adam that may or may not have actually been manifest in a feminine form, and then Adam is intimate with Lilith, but it leads to some sort of negative sexual energy that brings about souls, it brings lives into this world, and those lives go on to become forces of negativity in this world. So Lilith is some sort of reference to a negative sexual encounter, of which the Mefarshim talk about it lasting over 100 years, because Adam and Chava grow estranged from one another, and then they come back together. In that time, Adam is intimate with Lilith, and they sire children. But again, it's so important that we talk about this, because the term children does not necessarily mean human children. You have an Av and you have a Tulda. An Av means a father, and a Tulda is a byproduct. You have Av, Aves Malachas, father activities that you're not allowed to do on Shabbos. It's not physical fathers, it's parent ideas, supreme concepts of which there are offshoot concepts. Adam, as a physical being, like all of us, when we do different things physically, it doesn't just make a difference in this world, it makes a difference in higher realms. When Adam engages in particular behaviors, it creates spiritual forces that can then actually, so it starts from a behavior down here, that creates a spiritual force up there, and those spiritual forces can manifest down here. I gave a lecture on this years ago. What's a mazik? What's a mazik? A demon. What's a mazik? Mazik literally means something causes damage. So, for example, we're actually going to read this in this coming week's parasha. We've got the story of the Akedah. The Akedah is Avram taking Yitzchak to Har Moriah to sacrifice him. So the Medrash tells us that, and Rashi goes into this, that when they're traveling to the mountain, they come across a river, and the river, the Medrash tells us, is Satan. It's a negative force that's there to test Avram. And when the water gets to Avram's nose, he's crossing the river with his son Yitzchak, is trying to get across. As soon as the water gets to his nose, it recedes and is able to carry on traveling. If you would have met Avram, who said, how was the trip? He said, crazy, crazy. There was a raging river and it was really hard to get here, but I'm here. Thank God I'm here. But if you would have looked at the narrative from a spiritual point of view, there was no water, there was no person, there was a spiritual force that manifests in a physical way to prevent Avram from doing that which Hashem wants. If you look at it on a surface physical level, you got to tell a physical story. If you look at it on a spiritual level, you got to tell a spiritual story. A soul that is tested to achieve something. A man who crosses a river to get somewhere. They're parallel stories that align perfectly, but you can separate them. Lilith is some sort of feminine energy. Is it a feminine energy which exists within Adam's psyche? Or is it a physical woman? Don't know. Different opinions. But the point is not who she was, it's what comes out of it. And what comes out of it is that Adam masters spiritual forces of negativity. This is all to do with the tree of knowledge. All to do with the tree of knowledge is now having deviant sexual encounters on a spiritual form. Because remember, Adam's not like you and me. We're talking about highly refined spiritual character. So when he does stuff, it creates all sorts of forces. And he's engaging with Lilith, whatever that force is, and it creates mazikim. It creates demons. It creates negative forces. Negative forces like raging rivers that are there to prevent growth, not raging rivers that irrigate fields, but raging rivers that kill people. How do you know the difference? Is an ocean good or bad? How would you know? How would I know? Is a tree good or bad? We don't know because we can't see. We're not gifted to see the spiritual makeup and purpose of every tree, of every person, of every river, of every drop of rain. But there are positive and negative. And Lilith is part of that whole narrative. If you look in Kabbalah, Lilith is still around today. There's a whole ritual after a couple engage in intimacy. So in Shulchan Aruch and in Jewish tradition, it talks about after engaging in intimacy between a husband and wife, then they wash neguvasa, you wash your hands, and you sprinkle water on the floor, to do with any negative forces that may have come into the space during intimacy, which is meant to be between a husband and wife in a loving state. But if there was any selfishness in the process, and selfishness doesn't mean that you enjoyed it, that you enjoy the intimacy. Selfishness is a whole other thing. But then you can draw down negative energies and you sprinkle the water in order to dispel or disperse those negative energies. So again, it has to do with Lilith. Lilith is still around. Lilith just seems to constantly be linked to sexuality, to sexual conduct. Just as Samael and other negative forces are linked to other things. So that's the story of Lilith. Sorry if that was a little anticlimactic. Are there any questions? Esther says she thought we weren't meant to say her name out loud. I don't know. Maybe. I haven't seen that. I've seen about other things that we don't say certain things, but that's more to do with giving Tumah power, but definitely in the capacity of how we're talking about it now, we can say names because we're talking about it in context of learning. So when we're talking about learning, sometimes we have to specify what we're talking about. Look, she's not the sort of character that I'm walking around with her on my lips and thinking about her, because no, we don't want to give chayas, we don't want to give energy to spiritual concepts that we don't have any relationships with. Look, this video is going to go on YouTube, and there's going to be like all these weird sectors of YouTube land that are going to be going full on psycho. Watch this video in a year, you'll see the comments from weirdos. But I love everyone, but there are people that have gone completely weird and occult on all this stuff, which goes beyond the pale of Judaism. I'm just telling you what it is from a little bit of what's written in Medrash and Mefarshim and some references in Lurianic Kabbalah. Okay, so let's see. I'm going to go through some questions. Who did Cain and I think it's meant to who's Seth? I don't know who Seth is. Who'd they marry? Okay, so we're going to get into the descendants of Adam and Chava next week. Who are the descendants? Where is everyone getting husbands and wives and partners from, and all that? And then we'll come back to how do you have all these siblings marrying each other? We don't have any genetic issues. We'll come back to that next week. That's next week. No, Sebek, save it. We'll get into all the descendants next week. Any other questions that I haven't? I don't think there are. All right. So I'm going to wrap before we take any further questions. That's it for this week. I'm going to end the recording, and we'll be back next week with the Descendants of Adam and Chava. We're going to tie this series up, and we're going to draw out a whole lot of important lessons as they relate to us in the 21st century, lessons of spiritual, philosophical, and practical life lessons. So I'll see you next week for that.